The stars glimmered like scattered diamonds across the black expanse of space. The distant hum of the space station echoed through its cold metal corridors. Lieutenant John Harris had been stationed at this remote outpost for nearly a year. A skilled diplomat and negotiator, he was tasked with ensuring peace and stability in one of the most volatile regions of the galaxy. But nothing in his training had prepared him for what was about to unfold. The station was a hub for various alien species, some friendly, some not so much. The constant flow of different cultures, technologies, and politics was part of John's daily life. But when the announcement came that the renowned alien princess, Scifi of the Zorian Empire, was arriving for a diplomatic visit, John knew this would be no ordinary day. John had heard stories about Princess Scifi, the youngest daughter of the Zorian Emperor. Known for her beauty, strength, and intelligence, she had a reputation that stretched far beyond her home planet. But what caught John's attention most was her cold, almost unreachable demeanor. The Zorians were a proud people, and their princess was said to be as fierce as the storms that raged across her planet. The moment the princess stepped off her sleek, silver ship, John could feel the air shift. She stood tall, her striking features framed by the dark blue and silver armor she wore. Her long, silver hair cascaded down her back, and her piercing violet eyes scanned the station with sharp precision. It was clear she was accustomed to being in control, and she carried herself with the authority of someone who had never had to ask for anything. John was nervous, but he hid it well behind a calm, practiced expression. He had been assigned to greet her, to make sure her arrival was smooth, and to ensure that the talks between their species went without a hitch. He extended his hand as she approached, a friendly smile on his face. "Princess Scifi," he said, his voice steady but filled with awe. "It's an honor to meet you. I'm Lieutenant John Harris, assigned to assist with your stay here." Scifi didn't immediately acknowledge him. Her eyes, cold and distant, remained fixed on the station around her, taking in every detail as though she were measuring it against an invisible scale. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but laced with authority. "Lieutenant Harris, I've read about your reputation," she said, her gaze briefly meeting his. "I hope your skills will be enough to manage this station during my visit. The Zorians are not known for being patient, and neither am I." John nodded, trying not to let her intimidating presence unnerve him. "Of course, Your Highness. I'll make sure everything goes smoothly." She didn't smile, didn't offer a word of reassurance. Instead, she turned and began walking toward the station's grand hall, her attendants following closely behind. John hesitated for a moment, then quickly fell into step beside her. The silence between them was thick, but John tried to fill it with small talk. "It's a long journey from Zoria," he remarked, trying to gauge her mood. "How was your trip?" Scifi glanced at him briefly, her expression unreadable. "I've traveled farther and endured much worse," she said flatly, as though the question itself were beneath her. "I didn't come here for small talk, Lieutenant. I came here to discuss matters that affect the future of my people." John swallowed, sensing the change in the tone of the conversation. "Of course, Your Highness. The peace talks are our top priority as well." "Then let's get on with it," she replied, her voice sharp and commanding. As they entered the grand hall, John watched her take in the room with a calculating gaze. The space was designed to impress. Gleaming walls, intricate designs, and holographic projections of star systems and galaxy maps. It was all meant to represent the power and sophistication of the Federation. But to Scifi, it seemed to be nothing more than an empty display. She made her way to the central table where several high-ranking officials from the station were already waiting. John followed, his heart racing slightly. This wasn't just another diplomatic meeting. This was a test to see if the human race and its representatives could earn the respect of one of the most powerful figures in the galaxy. As they sat down, Scifi turned her gaze toward John. Her eyes narrowed, as though sizing him up. He met her gaze, trying his best to remain composed. "I hope you understand the stakes, "Lieutenant," she said, her voice cool but filled with an unspoken threat. "The future of your species will depend on the outcome of these talks. If you fail—" John nodded, knowing the weight of her words. He had heard of the Zorian Empire's might, their advanced technology, and their ability to crush any opposition. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. "I understand, Your Highness," he replied, his voice steady. "I assure you, the Federation is committed to peace and cooperation. We will do whatever it takes to avoid conflict." Scifi studied him for a moment longer, then shifted her gaze to the holographic display of the galaxy, as if dismissing him entirely. She seemed uninterested in his assurances, as though she had already decided what she thought of him and of humanity. The meeting began, and John quickly found himself at the center of a complicated discussion about territorial disputes and resource allocations. Despite his best efforts, he couldn't shake the feeling that Scifi wasn't really listening to him. She spoke only when necessary, her responses brief and to the point, as if she were marking time until something more important came along. By the end of the meeting, John was exhausted. He had worked hard to keep the discussion civil, but it was clear that the princess was not easily swayed. She was cold, distant, and unmoved by his attempts to forge a meaningful connection. As the meeting concluded and the princess made her way back to her quarters, John couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. He had hoped for a more promising start. But instead, he found himself facing the icy walls of the princess's indifference. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a much larger, more complex journey. One that would challenge him in ways he never expected, and test the boundaries of diplomacy, respect, and the very nature of what it meant to be an ally, or something more. The following day, Lieutenant John Harris woke up early, his mind still replaying the tense encounter with Princess Scifi. He had expected a challenging conversation, but her coldness had left him wondering how to approach her in the future. She had made it clear that her time was valuable, and any attempts at casual conversation had been met with a polite, but firm, dismissal. Despite his unease, John had a job to do. The peace talks were crucial, not just for the Federation, but for the future of countless worlds that depended on these negotiations. He couldn't afford to let personal feelings cloud his judgment. Today's meeting would be different, more formal and focused. He arrived at the conference room early, checking the holographic displays and adjusting the settings. His fingers tapped nervously on the table, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. John knew that if this meeting failed, it would be a huge blow to the Federation's standing in the galaxy. Princess Scifi arrived on time. As expected, her movements were graceful, and her presence filled the room as soon as she entered. The high-ranking officials from the station had already gathered, standing up in unison as she walked to the table. John remained seated, a slight sense of discomfort bubbling in his chest. Despite their cold first meeting, he couldn't ignore the feeling that there was more to this alien princess than met the eye. Scifi took her seat at the head of the table, her gaze immediately shifting to the display in front of her. She didn't offer any pleasantries, simply waiting for the proceedings to begin. John, noticing her disinterest, spoke first. "Princess Scifi, we are grateful for your willingness to continue these talks," he began, his tone calm but respectful. "We've outlined the key points we need to address today. The Federation is eager to find common ground on the issues that divide us." Scifi looked up at him, her violet eyes studying him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "I didn't come here for your gratitude, Lieutenant," she said softly, though her words carried weight. "I came here to secure the future of my people. Let's not waste time with unnecessary formalities." John nodded, taking her words to heart. He had heard that the Zorians valued efficiency above all else, and Scifi's words confirmed it. He adjusted his approach, focusing entirely on the agenda. "The first issue on the table," John began, "is the matter of resource distribution. The Federation has long been a neutral force, but we have had disagreements with the Zorian Empire regarding mining rights in the outer sectors." Scifi raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The silence between them was thick, as if each word she spoke had been carefully measured. Mining in the outer sectors is critical for both of our economies, John continued, but there have been reports of illegal mining operations, which have led to tensions between our people. The Federation is committed to resolving these issues peacefully, but we need your cooperation. Xylara's lips curled into a faint, unreadable smile. Your Federation believes in diplomacy and peace, but peace comes with a price. I'm not here to settle for half measures. If the Federation wants the Zorians to trust them, it's going to take more than empty promises. John fought to keep his expression neutral. We're not asking for trust, Princess. We're asking for a fair agreement, one that benefits both sides. The princess leaned back in her chair, her gaze never leaving him. And if I don't believe that this agreement will benefit the Zorian Empire? Her voice was smooth, but there was an undeniable edge to it. John swallowed hard. He could feel the weight of her words. The stakes were high, and failure was not an option. Then we must find a way to prove it. We'll offer more resources from our sector in exchange for access to the mining rights, along with guarantees of fair trade and joint operations. Xylara paused, her eyes narrowing as she considered his proposal. Your offer is interesting, she said finally. But the Zorian people do not take kindly to being treated as equals with lesser species. John's heart skipped a beat. He had known that the Zorians considered themselves superior to most other species, but hearing it so plainly from their princess was a stark reminder of the challenge he faced. I understand the pride of your people, John replied, his voice steady. But the Federation believes in equality. We can work together to build something greater than the sum of our parts. That is what we offer, partnership, not subjugation. The princess stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. For a brief instant, John thought she might dismiss the idea entirely, but instead she spoke again, her voice quieter, but no less firm. Partnerships can be useful, she said, but only if both sides can offer something of value. What does the Federation have that we want? John's mind raced as he considered his response. The Federation wasn't as powerful as the Zorians, but they had something valuable, something the Zorians couldn't get anywhere else. Technology, he said, his voice firm. The Federation has developed advanced technologies in energy production, medical care, and environmental sustainability. We can offer these in exchange for cooperation. This is something your people could benefit from in the long term. Xylara's eyes flashed with interest, but she remained silent for a moment. Energy production, she murmured, almost to herself. That would be useful. John didn't let the hint of interest slip away. Yes, Your Highness. We believe that together we could create something that would benefit both our people. It would not be an easy path, but the rewards would be substantial. The princess studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. Finally, she nodded slightly, her expression softening ever so slightly. Perhaps. You have more to offer than I thought, Lieutenant. John allowed himself a small breath of relief, but he knew this was far from over. The first step had been taken, but there were many more to follow. The princess's approval was not easily won, and the road ahead would be filled with challenges. But for the first time since he met Xylara, John felt a flicker of hope. There was a chance, just a chance, that they could make this work. If they could find a way to meet each other halfway, it could change everything. For now, though, John kept his focus on the present. The peace talks were far from finished, and the real test was yet to come. As the days passed, Lieutenant John Harris continued his diplomatic efforts with Princess Xylara. The talks had taken an unexpected turn after their last meeting, and John couldn't shake the feeling that he had made some progress. The princess had been more receptive, though her aloofness still remained. It was clear that she was a woman of high status, with the weight of her people's future resting on her shoulders. John spent his time preparing for the next round of discussions, hoping to continue to build trust. But despite the positive shift, he couldn't help but feel the pressure. The Federation had a lot at stake, and he knew failure was not an option. Princess Stylara's rejection still lingered in his mind, but now it was more of a puzzle he was determined to solve. The following meeting took place in a grand hall aboard the Zorian flagship. John felt the stark contrast between the sleek, advanced technology of the Zorians and the more humble designs of the Federation. It was as if the very walls of the ship whispered of superiority, of ancient power, and of civilizations that had mastered the stars long before humans even dreamed of space travel. Zylara arrived promptly, her regal presence commanding immediate respect from everyone in the room. The Zorian officers, much like their princess, were tall and imposing, their eyes sharp with intelligence and pride. John couldn't help but feel out of place among them, but he knew that his role here was more than just as a representative of the Federation. He was the bridge that could either tear these two worlds apart or unite them for a future of cooperation. Zylara sat at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her eyes scanning the assembled diplomats. John took his seat at the far end of the table, opposite her. The silence in the room was palpable, and John couldn't help but notice the way the princess's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary. Was it curiosity or something else? Finally, she spoke, her voice as calm as it was commanding. "Lieutenant Harris, I trust you've come with more than just offers of trade and cooperation." John took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts before replying. "Yes, Your Highness. I understand that peace between our people cannot be built solely on promises of resources. There must be something more, something that strengthens the bond between us." Zylara raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "You are bold, Lieutenant, but what makes you think such a bond can be formed between two species so different in their ways?" John met her gaze steadily. "Because, despite our differences, both the Federation and the Zorians share a common goal: survival. We are both at the edge of the unknown, facing challenges that could threaten everything we hold dear. If we do not find a way to work together, we risk losing it all." The princess leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing in thought. "Survival, yes," she mused. "But you ask for something greater, a partnership, to share resources, knowledge, and power. What makes you think your people are worthy of such a partnership?" John knew this was the crucial point. The Zorians had never seen humans as equals, and winning their trust would take more than words. He needed to show that the Federation had something valuable to offer, not just in resources, but in wisdom, in resilience, and in the unshakable will to adapt. "We may not have the technological advancements that the Zorians possess," John began, choosing his words carefully. "But we have something else: human ingenuity. We are capable of innovating in ways that others cannot even imagine. And when faced with adversity, we do not falter. We adapt. We survive. And most importantly, we build." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Zylara's eyes were still fixed on him. Unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in her gaze, a glimmer of recognition, perhaps, or curiosity. "Your people are resilient. I will give you that," Zylara said finally. "But resilience alone is not enough. You speak of building, but how can you build something that will last when your foundations are so weak? You lack the strength to survive without the support of stronger allies." John felt a pang of frustration, but he kept his voice steady. "We don't need to be the strongest to survive. We've already shown that time and time again. Our strength comes from our ability to work together, to build relationships, and to evolve. We understand that every partnership is a two-way street. The Federation is not looking to conquer or dominate. We're offering a future where both of our peoples can prosper, not one where one stands above the other." Zylara's lips curled into a faint smile, but it wasn't a smile of amusement. It was something more calculating, as if she were testing him. "You believe that a mere promise of mutual benefit will be enough to convince my people?" she asked, her tone cool. "I do," John replied firmly. "I believe that the Zorians, despite their pride, understand the value of true partnership. I believe they understand that sometimes survival depends not on strength alone, but on wisdom. The wisdom to know when to stand alone and when to stand together. The princess's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were considering his words more carefully. Perhaps, she said slowly, you have a point. But words are just words, Lieutenant. They are only meaningful if backed by action. John's heart raced. He knew she was right. Words alone wouldn't win her trust. But he also knew that he couldn't afford to back down now. If it's action you want, Your Highness, he said, his voice steady and strong, then I am willing to prove it. The princess leaned back in her chair, studying him with a mixture of admiration and challenge. Then prove it, Lieutenant. Show me that your Federation can live up to its promises. As the meeting continued, John could sense the growing tension in the room. It was clear that this was not just a political negotiation. It was a test of will, of resolve, and of the true intentions behind every word spoken. And for the first time since he arrived on the Zorian ship, John felt the full weight of the challenge before him. If he couldn't prove the Federation's worth to Xylara, this fragile alliance would shatter, and the consequences would be far-reaching. But John wasn't about to give up. He had come too far, and he knew that the future of both their peoples rested on his shoulders. Lieutenant John Harris sat at his desk, staring out of the large observation window. The stars beyond the Zorian flagship shimmered, distant and cold. He had just returned from a tense meeting with Princess Xylara, and the weight of their conversation lingered in his mind. The princess had made it clear that the next steps in their negotiation would not be easy. If he was going to prove the Federation's worth, he had to show them that humanity wasn't just capable of surviving. They could thrive alongside the Zorians. John rubbed his temples. The pressure was mounting. The Federation's future depended on this mission. His success or failure could determine the fate of not just human diplomacy with the Zorians, but also the long-term survival of both civilizations. He couldn't afford to fail. The door to his quarters opened, and Commander Lisa Grant, his trusted colleague and friend, entered the room. "John, are you all right?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. He turned to face her, offering a weak smile. "I'll be fine, Lisa. Just thinking about the next step." Lisa raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "I take it the princess wasn't as impressed by your speech as you hoped." John sighed. "She listened, but she's not convinced. She wants action, not just words. And she's right. I promised that humanity could be a valuable partner, but I have to show her that we can deliver." Lisa took a seat across from him. "Well, you know what they say. Actions speak louder than words." John nodded. "Exactly. But what action can I take that would convince her? What can I do to prove to her that the Federation can be a true ally to the Zorians?" "Maybe it's not about just proving your strength," Lisa suggested thoughtfully. "Maybe it's about showing her something that she doesn't already know. Something that will make her see your people in a new light." John looked at her, intrigued. "What do you mean?" "Think about it," she continued. "The Zorians have always been the superior power. They've never needed anyone else. They've never had to rely on other species to survive. But you, humans, have had to learn how to make do with less. You've had to be creative, resourceful, and adaptable. Show her that. Show her that humanity's strength lies not in brute force, but in innovation and adaptability." John felt a spark of inspiration. Lisa was right. Maybe it wasn't about matching the Zorians in strength or technology. It was about showing them the unique value humanity could bring to the table. "Thanks, Lisa," he said with a nod. "I think I know what I need to do now." Later that day, John found himself standing before Princess Xylara once again, this time in a smaller, more private setting. They were alone in a sleek, white room that felt both modern and ancient, an odd combination of the Zorian culture. The princess sat at a simple, elegant table, her eyes fixed on him as she waited for him to speak. "I've been thinking," John began, his voice steady. "You're right. Words are nothing without action. And I'm here today to show you that humanity can deliver." Xylara's eyes narrowed, as if weighing his every word. I'm listening, Lieutenant. John took a deep breath and continued. Humans are not the strongest, but we have something far more valuable: our ability to adapt, to innovate. Our greatest strength is our resourcefulness. I know you Zorians have advanced technology, but what I can offer you today is something different. Something that will help not just your empire, but all those who work with you. The princess leaned forward slightly, her interest piqued. And what exactly are you offering? John smiled, feeling a growing sense of confidence. I've been working with my team to design a device. It's a prototype, and it's far from perfect, but it's a step towards something that could change the future for both our species. It's a small-scale energy converter, one that can take energy from any source, no matter how small, and amplify it. Imagine the possibilities. You could power entire colonies, fuel your ships for longer voyages, and even improve your weapons technology, all using a fraction of the energy you're currently consuming. Xylara's gaze didn't leave him as he spoke, her sharp eyes calculating every word. And you believe this device will work? She asked, her tone skeptical but curious. I believe it can work, John replied. It's not perfect yet, but with your people's expertise in energy and my team's ingenuity, we can make it happen. And when it does, it will be a game changer. For a long moment, there was silence. Xylara leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled in front of her mouth as she thought. John could feel the tension building, not just in the room, but within himself. This was his moment. He had to make her see that this was the kind of partnership that could benefit both of them. Finally, the princess spoke. You've been working on this for how long? A few months, John answered. It's still in the early stages, but we've already seen promising results with smaller models. It's just a matter of scaling it up. And you're willing to share this technology with the Zorians? Xylara asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. Of course, John said without hesitation. This isn't about taking advantage of your people. It's about working together to create something that benefits everyone. Xylara studied him for a long time, her expression unreadable. You are a brave human, Lieutenant. I will admit you've given me something to think about. John's heart raced as he tried to read her reaction. Was she impressed, or was she just humoring him? He couldn't tell. This is a risky proposition, Xylara continued, but perhaps there's something to your words after all. I will need time to think, and I will need to see proof that your claims are true. John nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. Of course, I understand, and I'll do whatever it takes to prove it. As he left the room, John couldn't help but feel a small sense of hope. The princess hadn't rejected his offer outright. She was considering it, weighing the potential benefits for her people. It was a start, and it was enough to keep his determination alive. The days following John's proposal were filled with uncertainty. He had sent the technical specifications of the energy converter to the Zorian engineers, hoping they would see the potential in his design. He had no idea how they would respond. In the back of his mind, he wondered if they were simply playing a game, testing how far humanity was willing to go. But he couldn't afford to second-guess himself now. The princess had agreed to meet with him again, and this time she invited him to witness a demonstration. John couldn't contain his nervous energy as he made his way to the Zorian testing facility. He had worked tirelessly with his team to ensure everything was ready, but a small part of him still feared failure. If the demonstration didn't go as planned, it could ruin everything. The facility was a vast, high-tech lab, unlike anything John had seen before. Towering machines hummed in the background, their sleek surfaces reflecting the ambient light from the overhead panels. There were Zorian engineers everywhere, moving quickly and speaking in hushed tones as they prepared for the test. Princess Xylara stood at the center of the room, flanked by a group of her advisors. Her expression was unreadable, and John could feel the weight of her gaze on him as he approached. Lieutenant Harris, she said coolly, acknowledging him with a nod. We are ready to begin. John offered a respectful bow. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. Princess. Celara didn't respond, but her sharp eyes followed every move he made. She was still sizing him up, trying to decide if he was worthy of the trust she had extended. A large table in the center of the room held the prototype of the energy converter. It looked simple enough. A sleek, compact device with a series of glowing panels along its sides. John could feel his heart racing as the engineers connected the device to a power source. It was time for the test. One of the engineers, a tall Zorian with dark blue skin, gave John a nod. The device is connected. We are ready to proceed. John stepped forward and glanced at the princess. If everything goes as planned, this device will take the energy from the power source and amplify it tenfold. It will provide far more energy than it consumes. Celara raised an eyebrow. And if it doesn't work? If it doesn't work, John said with a calm that he didn't entirely feel, we'll go back to the drawing board and make improvements. But I believe it will. The engineer flipped a switch, and the device powered up with a soft whir. At first, nothing happened. The lights on the device blinked, and for a tense moment, it seemed like nothing would change. John's stomach twisted in knots. Had he miscalculated? Were they about to witness the failure he had feared? Then, suddenly, the lights on the device began to glow brighter, and the energy readings on the nearby monitors spiked. The engineers quickly adjusted the settings, confirming that the energy output was indeed much greater than the input. John's heart skipped a beat as he saw the numbers rise. It was working. Princess Celara stepped forward, her expression shifting from skepticism to something closer to admiration. Impressive, she said, her voice soft yet filled with approval. This is unexpected. John couldn't help the small grin that spread across his face. I'm glad you think so. But this is just the beginning. With further refinement, it could revolutionize energy production for your entire empire. You wouldn't need to rely on conventional power sources. It's clean, efficient, and scalable. The princess looked at the device, her eyes calculating. I admit, Lieutenant, you have proven your point. This is a remarkable achievement. But we are not yet ready to place our full trust in this technology. It will need more testing, more verification. If we are to move forward, you will need to show us that this technology is not just a one-time success. John nodded, his determination still strong. Of course, Your Highness. We're prepared to continue working with your engineers to ensure the technology is safe and effective. We're in this together. Celara regarded him for a moment, as if measuring his sincerity. Then she turned to her advisors and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Very well. We will proceed with further testing. But understand this, Lieutenant Harris, this is not just about technology. It is about trust. You have taken a step in earning that trust, but there is still much to prove. I understand, Princess, John said. We're ready for whatever comes next. As the meeting concluded, John couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The princess had not only acknowledged the success of the prototype, but had also agreed to further testing. It was a step forward, but he knew there was much more to be done. As he left the testing facility, his mind raced with possibilities. If the energy converter proved successful on a larger scale, it could change everything for humanity. But more than that, it could change the way the Zorians viewed them. It could prove that humans had something valuable to offer, not just as a race, but as partners. But there was one thing that John couldn't shake. Even as he pushed forward with the technology, a part of him couldn't forget the princess's words. This wasn't just about technology. It was about trust. And trust, John knew, was something that had to be earned, one step at a time. The days following the successful demonstration of the energy converter were filled with mixed emotions for John. On one hand, he had proven the technology's effectiveness. On the other, the Zorians were not yet fully convinced. Their cautious approach made it clear that the technology needed to undergo more rigorous testing before it could be adopted on a larger scale. But John was not one to back down easily. Princess Celara had given him one final task. She wanted to see the energy converter in action, not just in a controlled lab environment, but in a real-world scenario. The Zorians had offered a remote location on their home planet for the test, a vast, uninhabited region where the technology could be tested on a grand scale, with no risk to their cities or people. John's team worked day and night to prepare. The pressure was mounting. If the converter failed in this trial, it could mean the end of humanity's chance to form a meaningful partnership with the Zorians. Worse, it could damage their credibility, leaving them unable to offer anything else of value. John couldn't afford to think about failure. He had worked too hard, and the stakes were too high. This was their final chance. The morning of the test, he stood at the edge of the barren, desert-like landscape, watching as the Zorian engineers prepared the equipment. His heart pounded in his chest. Scilara was there, her presence commanding, as usual. She had insisted on observing the trial personally, her eyes sharp and calculating as she observed every movement of the human team. The wind swept across the dry plains, kicking up clouds of dust as the final preparations were made. The converter was set up in the middle of a large area, and the Zorian engineers began connecting it to a power grid. John stepped forward, joined by his lead engineer, Sarah, who had worked alongside him to ensure the converter systems were optimized for this test. "We're ready, sir," Sarah said, her voice steady but laced with the same tension that John felt. "The converter is set to draw power from the Zorian grid and amplify it as planned." John nodded, his face hard with determination. "Let's do it." He turned to Princess Tylara, who had been standing a few feet away, her arms crossed in front of her. "Princess, we're about to begin. We've made adjustments to the converter to ensure it can handle the larger scale of energy required. We're confident it will work." Tylara studied him for a moment, her eyes piercing. "You've said that before, Lieutenant Harris. Do not mistake confidence for success. This test will prove whether your technology is worthy of our trust." John met her gaze, unflinching. "It will work, Princess. We're ready." The engineers activated the device, and the ground seemed to hum with energy as the converter powered up. John's breath caught in his throat as he watched the energy readings on the monitors. The device was drawing power from the grid, amplifying it just as it had in the lab. For a moment, everything seemed perfect. But then, the system began to flicker. The energy readings started to fluctuate, jumping wildly as if the converter was struggling to handle the increased load. John's stomach dropped. This wasn't supposed to happen. Sarah quickly moved to the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys as she tried to stabilize the system. "Something's wrong," she muttered. "It's not holding steady." Tylara's sharp gaze never left them. "I trust you're prepared for failure, Lieutenant. Your technology seems to be unstable." John's mind raced. He couldn't let this slip away. Not now. He had to fix this. "Sarah, try rerouting the power through the secondary system. We can balance the load that way." Sarah worked quickly, but the problem persisted. The converter wasn't responding as they had expected, and the energy output began to spike dangerously. John knew if they didn't act fast, they could lose everything. The Zorians wouldn't trust humanity again if this experiment failed. He turned to Tylara, his voice tense but determined. "Princess, if you give us a few more minutes, we can fix this. I know the technology works. We've tested it under controlled conditions. We just need to make adjustments." Tylara didn't respond right away. Instead, she watched them carefully, her arms still crossed. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something, perhaps concern, or maybe impatience. John felt the weight of her gaze on him. This was the moment. If he didn't prove himself now, everything he had worked for would be for nothing. He could almost hear the clock ticking in his mind, the pressure building. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Sarah found a solution. "I stabilized the system, redirecting the energy. Now." The converter hummed, and the energy readings began to stabilize. The wild fluctuations slowed, and the power output returned to a steady flow. John allowed himself a breath of relief, but his eyes remained focused on the monitors. The converter was now working flawlessly. Filara stepped forward, her expression shifting from uncertainty to something akin to approval. "I see now that you were right, Lieutenant Harris. Your technology is capable of achieving what you promised." John nodded, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "Thank you, Princess. We'll continue refining it to ensure it's even more efficient and stable. This is just the beginning." Filara studied him for a moment longer before speaking again. "It seems I misjudged you, Lieutenant. This technology is a remarkable achievement. You have earned my respect, and that of the Zorian people. But understand this, trust is earned in more ways than one. You will need to prove yourselves in the future." John's heart swelled with pride. They had done it. They had passed the final trial. As the team packed up and prepared to return, John looked to Filara one last time. This wasn't the end of their journey, but it was a crucial turning point. Humanity had proven its worth, and now they had the chance to build a true partnership with the Zorians, a partnership based on trust, respect, and mutual benefit. And that, he thought, was only the beginning. The journey had been long, and the stakes were high, but John knew they were standing at the threshold of something extraordinary. As he looked out over the vast Zorian landscape, a sense of accomplishment filled him, though he was aware this was just the beginning of a new chapter. The Zorians had recognized humanity's potential, and that was a victory in itself. The final trial was over, but the work was far from finished. The Zorian engineers had already begun discussing further developments with Sarah, who was eagerly sharing ideas about improving the converter's efficiency and expanding its range. John couldn't help but feel proud of the team. They had come together in the face of adversity, and now their hard work was paying off. Princess Filara approached him quietly, her footsteps almost silent on the rocky terrain. John turned to face her, his heart beating faster in anticipation. He wasn't sure where they stood anymore. The test had been a success, but the future remained uncertain. Would the Zorians truly accept humanity as partners, or would they retreat into their own world, leaving Earth to fend for itself? Filara's face was unreadable, her expression as calm and composed as ever. She studied John for a moment, as though weighing his very presence. He could feel the weight of her gaze, but he refused to back down. He had earned this moment of respect, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. "You've done well, Lieutenant Harris," she said, her voice soft but firm. "The technology works, and humanity has shown the capability to adapt. I must admit, I had my doubts, but I have seen now that your people have potential." John smiled slightly, relief flooding through him. "Thank you, Princess. We've worked hard to earn your trust. I know there's a lot more to do, but this is a start." Filara nodded, her eyes lingering on him. "Indeed, this is just the beginning. There is much that your people can offer us, but much that you still have to learn. We will move forward with caution, but with the hope that this partnership can prosper." John's heart swelled with pride. They had made it. The Zorians had agreed to a partnership, albeit a cautious one. But it was a partnership nonetheless. The work wasn't over, but the first steps had been taken. It wasn't just about the energy converter anymore. It was about the future of both humanity and the Zorians. As the sun began to set behind the distant mountains, casting a soft orange glow over the landscape, John took a deep breath. The journey had been long, but it had all led to this moment. And now, as he stood beside Princess Filara, he knew that the future was bright. "Do you think we can really build something together?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost uncertain. Filara turned her gaze toward him, her expression softening for the first time since their arrival. "I believe we can, but it will take time. Trust is not something that is given easily, but we have seen what your people are capable of. If you can continue to prove yourselves, there is no reason why this partnership cannot succeed." John nodded, feeling the new sense of determination settle in his chest. He was no longer just fighting for the success of the converter or the mission. He was fighting for the future of both worlds. For the Zorians and the humans, this was more than just a scientific endeavor. It was a chance to forge a lasting alliance, one that could change the course of history. With the Zorians' support, humanity would be able to explore new frontiers, unlock new technologies, and perhaps even discover the secrets of the universe. It was a dream that had seemed impossible just a few short months ago, but now it felt like a real possibility. As they turned to walk back to the camp, John found himself lost in thought. What would the next steps look like? Would the Zorians be able to integrate their technology into their own systems? Would Earth be able to keep up with the rapid advancements the partnership would bring? These questions lingered in his mind, but for the first time, he felt confident that humanity could face whatever came next. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The relationship between humans and Zorians had been forever changed. They had begun to bridge the gap between their two worlds. The barriers of language, culture, and distrust had been slowly chipped away, replaced with understanding and hope. And as they returned to the Zorian capital, John looked at Scylla again, seeing her in a new light. She was no longer just the skeptical princess, but someone who had seen what humanity could offer. They had earned her respect, and in doing so, they had earned the chance to build something bigger than themselves. "Thank you, Princess," John said, his voice steady, "for everything. We won't let you down." Scylla's lips curled into a small, approving smile. "We will see. But for now, I think you've earned a moment of peace. The real work begins tomorrow." John smiled back, the weight of the journey lifting from his shoulders, even if only for a moment. The road ahead was long, but with this first step, humanity had a new ally. And that was enough to fill him with hope for the future.